Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Game to the Comp video we're going to be tackling two topics. The first of which is a user has grabbed an AMD Radeon Vega Frontier Edition. It is landed on his doorstep, is now set up in his PC, and he has posted some results online. A number of you have actually messaged me asking me to cover this topic because it's getting a little bit messy, so I'll throw my 2 cents in. And then we're going to move over to AMD's EPIC CPUs, which of course are aimed at the server market and how they're competing with Intel's latest and greatest. So with that said, let's start out with, that's right, you guessed it, the Frontier Edition. For the sake of this video, I'm going to make the assumption that you're pretty familiar with Radeon Vega's Frontier Edition. It is, for the few of you who are not, it is not aimed necessarily for the gaming-focused market, but it does have a gaming mode, as we discussed yesterday. Now, this individual has had it shipped to him. He is #define. He's part of the Discuss community, and is also known as Claudius. Now, there are a couple of things I want you to know right off the bat. First, he was using an i7-4790K, and this is in conjunction, of course, with DDR3 memory and Windows 10. And the second, and perhaps most alarming thing, if you will, is the fact that the PSU is just 550 watts. We'll talk about that more in just a moment, but I want to say this right off the bat. So, getting into the results, because it's imperative we talk about results before we go any further. Just so we're all on like a clear understanding of what's going on. So, the results were around the high 20,000s, the low 20,000s, around 21,000 to 22,000 for the graphics score in 3D Mark Firestrike. Now, for those who don't know, if you're not too familiar, it's roughly on par with the GTX 1080. I use the word roughly because obviously it does depend on the particular model of 1080. For example, the pre-overclocked ones are going to be much more likely to throttle up and turbo to much higher frequencies. On the other hand, I'm sorry, I just said turbo, I meant boost, excuse me, boost to higher frequencies. Faster cards such as the GTX 1080 Ti will probably score very low 30,000s, possibly very high 20,000s. So perhaps around the 29 to 30,000 mark is around typical with a 1080 Ti. Obviously, once again, with the usual caveats of it depending upon the vendor, the clock frequencies and so on. So the chap in question is not familiar, and this is the other issue I have with these results. He is not familiar with AMD control panels and seems to be having issues with getting the clock speeds stable. In fact, he's been messing around with Wattman, and one of his exact quotes was, "I had to make sure the power limit in Wattman is set to 30%. I manually set it 1600 MHz for the last 3 states, but made sure no change in the GPU clock. I think I might have a temperature limit to have impact, but I've set them to max. I will let you know later on." End quote. Which obviously is not exactly great, the fact he's just been kind of setting the frequencies manually. I'd have preferred for us to be able to see what frequencies it would be boosting to and all that stuff. Some folks are also commenting regarding the drivers. They've said that they're, not the correct drivers. That doesn't appear to be the case. He did say that he downloaded the drivers from the Frontier website, basically went through the portal, and they are the correct drivers for this particular card, so he's fine. Quite honestly, there's a lot more for me to say on this subject, but I feel that most of you are probably saying it for me. Honestly, these results are not really indicative of anywhere close to final results, and I don't really blame the guy because ultimately it's not down to him to do professional reviews. And here's kind of the rub and the issue I really have with all of this. It's kind of on AMD that this stuff's coming up and people are being kind of negative towards Vega for gaming, or at least questioning it, because yes, I fully comprehend, I'm 100% behind the fact that it's professional, but the fact that you added in gaming mode on this card means to me that you should have given it to more individuals to test. I'm not saying, everyone and their mother. I'm not saying that, you send out like 500 Vega cards to everyone, but I think a few cards to select individuals so that they could at least test it out. And yes, they gave the exclusive to PC World, but there was no gaming-focused stuff in there. Now, my personal feeling, and I'm making a pure assumption here, is that, and this does tie into what other rumours are, but whether those rumours are true and my assumptions are bogus, that's down to you. But my personal opinion is that they're not confident at the moment. They're trying to wrangle further performance out of the gaming focused part of the card. And this is possibly why that, yes, they're willing to show off the professional usage stuff, but they're not happy for, even when PC World were testing, they weren't letting them run, I don't know, Doom or whatever, at a particular resolution, but also have frame rate counters on screen. It was more of a touchy-feely thing of saying, okay, it looks visually like it's running at the same speed as like a 1080 or a 1080 Ti or whatever. Also, the fact that this user was running a 550 watt power supply could be a problem. We don't really know. I mean, he's not done conclusive testing, and because we only have this one result at the moment, it's nowhere near enough for us to say one way or another. And obviously, because he's not filming this, because he's not running enough software or having, you know, the appropriate hardware on, the appropriate images on screen for us to really get a good indication of what's going on in terms of heat and everything like that, it's very hard for one of us to say, okay, it's the power issues that, you know, we don't even have like a voltage meter on his system to say, okay, well, these are the amps he's pulling, this is the wattage, this is like, you know, how much heat he's producing, this is whether he sacrificed a goat today, you know, to get the appropriate clock speeds. We just don't know. Therefore, it's very hard for me to say it's the PSU. It could be perhaps something else. It could even be maybe he didn't delete the drivers properly, delete the drivers properly from his old system, from the other graphics card. It may have been like a dozen different issues. So am I defending the card? Do I believe that you should rush out right now and buy a Radeon Vega Frontier Edition? Honestly, no. In fact, I don't believe you should rush out and buy any bloody card without reviews. And once again, even if I was a prosumer, even if I only did video editing for a living, which I guess kind of I do for this channel, but then again, I also have jobs and stuff, so that doesn't really make sense. But, you know, even if I did video editing like 24/7, you know, or I did like whatever, I still probably wouldn't rush out and buy this card, because I don't believe you should buy any card unless you... And basically, you should buy anything unless you've seen a lot of reviews for it. Unless you're like really, you know, you're just doing it because money doesn't really mean much to you. So if you're wealthy, you know, you've got, you know, you're earning a couple of, you know, million a year and you're just buying GPUs and hardware just for funsies, then by all means buy what you want. But if you're living on a, you know, realistic budget or a regular budget, then of course you should probably wait for more reviews. And I'm going to say the same thing for RX Vega. Wait for reviews. Whether it's ours, whether it's Tom's down the road, whether it's, you know, your friend Bill manages to get one, wait for reviews and wait to see if this thing's worth it. Because ultimately, that's kind of where it comes down to. I would be actually kind of surprised if we see the card absolutely demolish a GTX 1080 Ti with RX Vega. It's possible it might, because we don't know, for example, whether error correction is becoming an issue with the Frontier Edition. I believe it does have error correction on the HBM2. I need to double check that. I'm not 100%. So maybe that's causing a few frames per second of you know, lower performance. It could be even the fact that the drivers once again aren't mature enough, so maybe in a month or 2 months the drivers will be much better, much more stable, therefore game performance will go up, or it could even require some game patches as well. Okay, enough with the Frontier Edition. Let's move over to something else, and that is AMD's EPYC. A 7601 has appeared in Sysoft Sandra, and also some Cinebench R15s have appeared. I'd like to thank Frank via Facebook for this entry on Sysoft Sandra. So, for those who don't know, I'm pretty sure most regular viewers will know that EPYC, of course, is based on the Zen/Ryzen architecture, and it is developed for the server market. This is for the high-end market, so not necessarily something you're going to be running at home, but it is pretty interesting because you can probably take some of this information and get an idea of what's going to happen with Threadripper, and more realistically, and to be honest, in my mind anyway, more appropriately, it's more interesting because it tells us how competitive AMD are going to be in the server market, which tells us how well they're going to do financially, because obviously if they're doing well in the server market, they're going to be making more monies, which means that it filters down to us as regular customers. Anywho, thanks to 64 cores and 128 threads, we see the peak performance being 1242 G-flops. This is thanks to a base clock of 2.2 GHz, but it appears to be turboing up to 2.7 for this particular benchmark. So this means you're getting media processing capability of around 1348 MPICs. Now bear in mind, this CPU has 32 cores. Intel don't have that number of cores on their particular Intel Platinum series, but what they do have is an Intel Platinum 8180. Now we have discussed Intel's Platinum and server CPUs before, so I won't go too further into them, but basically there is a couple of results already on Syssoft Sandra. To put it into some level of context, you'll notice that the performance is actually high. You're getting 1345.76, if you want to be accurate, G-flops, and this means media processing capability of 4855. So for those of you who are terrible at math, it basically means that in this particular benchmark, AMD are being decimated by Intel. Something to note, however, is that yes, they have fewer threads, 112, excuse me, but they are running a much higher clock speed, 3.4 GHz. Realistically, there's a couple of things you can take away from this. The first is that the benchmark / the hardware of EPYC is not configured correctly, or maybe just doesn't work right with this particular benchmark. That's always a possibility. Or it could be something to do with the actual interconnectivity of EPYC. I don't necessarily know if I would agree it being that bad, because that's pretty awful of a hindrance. So we're going to have to wait, basically, to see if that's the case, or whether this is just early BIOS, early software. Maybe, there's something else going on. We'll just kind of have to wait, because ultimately it's not enough of results. Another website by the name of heist.de, so no longer are we going to the nirvana of happiness that is Syssoft Sandra, we're going to heist.de. They have results of Cinebench R15. And they are scoring just a shade under 7,000 points, 6,879 to be precise. So, assuming we don't see clock speed hikes, performance increases, that type of thing, these CPUs do pretty well, especially when they are much more aggressively priced compared to Intel's. So what I suspect is obviously Intel CPUs are definitely going to have some advantages with certain workloads, but let's just be honest, we kind of expected that anyway. No one thought to themselves, well, Intel are just going to lose on every single front. I truly believe that even Threadripper is going to lose out to certain workloads for like Skylake X, because it just is what it is. It's like Intel's hardware might be more expensive, but it might have the clock speed advantage. We just don't know. Although Skylake X is looking a bit dicey with the BIOSes at the moment, so it too might need further optimization. It's kind of weird actually, because AMD's hardware is just looking just strange all round. It looks like we're going to need further drivers and stuff for Vega. Intel clearly, despite the fact that they have said they haven't, they clearly rushed out the X299 platform in response to Ryzen / the X399. So as gamers, we're in this really weird position, because we're even hearing rumours now that we're not going to be getting Volta for graphics cards. I covered that a few days ago. In fact, we're going to be seeing a revision of the Pascal architecture. So basically a die shrink, which means that in effect, if you've got a fast graphics card, like just for a second, put yourself in the shoes of someone who has just upgraded to a 4K screen, and I've actually had some people messaging me asking my opinions on this, and I'm like, I have no idea. So I actually had a couple of people messaging me, round about the same question, but essentially it was like, yeah, I've got a 1440p screen, I'm not happy, I want to move to 4K. Maybe one chap wanted it because he was having a living room screen of 4K, and someone else just wanted like a 4K screen in his, computer room or whatever. And he had, I don't know, like a GTX 1070 or whatever it was, I can't remember. And obviously that's not really enough for 4K, right? Instead it's enough for 1440p. Which is fine, that's what a 1070 is sold for. The problem is, now, a lot of folks are like, well, do I jump on Vega? Do I wait? Do I just jump on Pascal and buy like the cheapest bloody Pascal card I can? Do I wait for a refresh of Pascal? What do I do? And it's going to be even trickier if Nvidia decide to try and cut the prices of the 10 series when Vega comes out. In theory, they could do that. The problem is, and this is something that's affecting both companies, the price of DRAM at the moment. So, yeah, there's a reason, for example, the 500 cards are just so bloody expensive right now. With all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share, subscribe. There'll be a couple of reviews popping up over the next couple of days as well, which is good, because now I'm no longer quite so far behind on everything, which makes me happy. So, with all of that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.